half price, but nobody wanted to bid on the mute Apache slave until a cowboy did. The morning sun rose slowly over the dusty streets of the small western town. Its warm light stretched across the wooden buildings, casting long shadows that danced with the creaking of shutters and the movement of early risers. Townsfolk were starting to gather near the town square, their boots crunching on the dry dirt, as a low murmur of conversation filled the air. Today was an auction day, and in this small town, auctions were events that drew everyone's attention, from cattle ranchers to shopkeepers and curious onlookers who had no business buying anything but loved the gossip. The auction platform stood at the center of the square. Its wooden planks were worn from years of use, rough under the soles of boots, and smelled faintly of horse sweat and sawdust. A long table was stacked with all sorts of goods, sacks of grain, barrels of flour, old furniture, and at the far end something that immediately made the crowd uneasy. A young Apache boy stood there, his dark eyes wide and alert, his small frame tense. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just looked around silently, his lips pressed tightly together as if holding in a secret the world could not know. His silence was unnerving to some, curious to others, and to many it was a reason to step back and avoid the platform entirely. Whispers began to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Why is he so quiet?" one man asked, scratching his gray beard. "He can't even talk," a woman murmured, her eyes darting toward the boy. Some children in the crowd peeked through the legs of the adults, pointing and giggling nervously, not understanding fully, but sensing that this was different from any auction item they had ever seen. Others, particularly the older men and seasoned traders, exchanged uneasy glances. In their minds, silence often meant trouble, and trouble meant risk, a risk they were not willing to take. The auctioneer, a tall man with a booming voice that could carry across the entire square, tried to begin the sale with his usual flair. He tapped his gavel and called out, "Next up, half price for the young Apache boy." "Who'll start the bidding?" His words echoed through the dusty streets, but instead of eager hands, there was hesitation. No one moved. No one stepped forward. A few brave souls shuffled their feet and mumbled excuses about having no money or no use for such a child. The tension was thick, almost visible, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The boy shifted slightly, his dark eyes scanning the crowd. His gaze was calm, almost knowing, but there was a quiet sadness in it. He was aware that everyone was judging him, sizing him up, deciding whether he was worth the coins they might pay. He had no voice to defend himself, no words to explain who he was or why he was there. All he could do was stand and endure, hoping someone would see beyond the fear and the prejudice, hoping someone would understand that he was more than just a price tag. As the moments passed, the crowd grew restless. Some townsfolk began to murmur among themselves, questioning why the auctioneer would even bring the boy to the platform. "Why not sell the livestock or the furniture?" one man whispered. "This boy, he's nothing to anyone." Another shook his head. "He's quiet for a reason." Nobody wants trouble. The boy heard none of these words, but their energy reached him, heavy and oppressive. Still, he did not flinch. He did not cry. He simply looked out at the people around him, and in his silence there was a strength, a dignity that none of them could take away. Hours seemed to stretch like days. The auctioneer tried again, raising his voice, trying to entice bids. "Half price." "Don't miss this opportunity." But it was no use. The fear, the prejudice, and the unwillingness to take a chance kept the crowd silent. Some even whispered that he was cursed or that no one should touch him. The boy's small hands clenched slightly at his sides, not in anger but in quiet resilience. He had learned already in his young life that the world could be harsh, but that didn't mean he would break. He had survived this far by keeping calm, by observing, and by holding on to the hope that someone, someday, would see him for who he truly was. Meanwhile, a few children in the crowd began to gather near the edges of the platform, curiosity overcoming their fear. They watched the boy carefully, noting the way he moved, the careful way he shifted his weight from one foot to another, and the alertness in his eyes. Unlike the adults, they did not judge him harshly. They simply noticed him, a human being standing in a world that wanted to define him by what he could not say. The boy looked at them once, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes, and then looked away, knowing he could not trust anyone yet. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning off the morning chill, and the auction continued to move slowly through its list of items. Barrels, crates, livestock, all sold to eager bidders, their coins clinking and clattering as deals were made. But the boy remained, a silent, immovable figure at the far end of the platform. The auctioneer's voice grew sharper, more insistent. "Someone, anyone, step up. Half price, don't miss this bargain." Still nothing. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other for hints of courage, but none came forward. It seemed that no one had the heart, or perhaps the bravery, to break the silence and see the boy for who he truly was. Then, from the outskirts of the crowd, a figure approached on horseback. His boots were dusty, his hat worn low over his eyes, and he carried a calm presence that seemed to part the whispers and uneasy looks of the townsfolk. This was a cowboy, a man who had spent years riding across open plains, dealing with hardships and danger that most townspeople could never imagine. He saw the boy, and instead of fear or judgment, he felt curiosity and something deeper, a sense that this child, despite his silence, had value and worth beyond what coins could measure. He dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving the boy's, and began to walk toward the platform with a steady, deliberate pace. The townsfolk watched in surprise. Who was this man, daring to approach when no one else would? Some muttered under their breath, questioning his wisdom, warning him of trouble. But the cowboy ignored them. His gaze was fixed, calm, and unwavering. He stopped in front of the auctioneer and asked simply, "How much?" The auctioneer blinked, momentarily stunned by the lack of fear, and replied, "Half price." The cowboy nodded, reaching into his pocket to retrieve a few coins, the sound of metal clicking a small, reassuring rhythm. The crowd murmured in shock. Finally, someone was willing to bid, willing to look past the silence, willing to take a chance. The boy watched this man carefully. He did not move at first, unsure of the intentions behind the calm, steady eyes that met his own. But there was something different about this cowboy. He did not look at him as property. He did not sneer or whisper judgments. He simply stood there, offering a chance, a possibility that perhaps the world could be kinder than the one he had known so far. For the first time in the morning, the boy allowed himself a small flicker of hope, a tiny spark of trust that maybe, just maybe, someone would see him as a person and not as a bargain to be ignored. The auctioneer banged his gavel once more, finalizing the deal. The crowd shifted, some shaking their heads, others whispering in disbelief. But the boy, standing silently, finally felt a change, a shift from the oppressive judgment of the town to the cautious acceptance of one man. The cowboy held out his hand, a gesture that required no words, and the boy slowly stepped forward. In that quiet moment, amidst the dust, the sunlight, and the curious eyes of the townsfolk, a connection was made, a bond that would grow stronger in the days to come. It was the beginning of a story not about silence, fear, or prejudice, but about understanding, patience, and the unexpected courage that could emerge from even the smallest and quietest of lives. And so the auction ended for the day, but for the boy and the cowboy, something far more important had begun. A journey of trust, learning, and discovery was about to unfold, one that neither of them could yet imagine, but one that would leave a mark not only on their lives, but also on the quiet town that had for so long failed to see what truly mattered. The cowboy led the boy away from the bustling town square, past the clamor of voices and the curious gazes of the townsfolk who whispered among themselves. The boy's small hands trembled slightly, and he kept his eyes down, unsure of what to expect. The cowboy walked slowly, allowing the boy to match his pace, never forcing him, never speaking harshly. He understood that trust could not be commanded. It had to be earned, one quiet step at a time. The boy glanced up occasionally, meeting the cowboy's steady eyes, sensing a calm that he had never felt before. It was a new feeling, strange, unfamiliar, and slightly frightening, but somehow comforting as well. They reached the edge of town, where the wooden buildings gave way to open plains and rolling hills. Here, the air smelled of wild grass, horses, and earth warmed by the sun. The cowboy gestured toward a modest cabin not far from the main road. "This will be your home for now," he said gently. The boy nodded silently, unsure what to say. He had never had a place to call his own, and the idea both frightened and intrigued him. The cowboy saw this hesitation but did not press. Instead, he led the boy inside, showing him the small room with a simple bed, a wooden chair, and a blanket. "You'll sleep here," he said, "and we'll figure the rest out together." For the first few days, the boy kept to himself. He wandered the edges of the property, watching the horses, studying the way the wind moved through the tall grass, and observing the cowboy as he went about his work. The cowboy did not force conversation, nor did he make any assumptions about the boy's silence. He noticed the small things, the way the boy's eyes followed the animals, the careful way he picked up fallen sticks or stones, and the way he seemed to notice everything without a word. These small observations spoke volumes to the cowboy, telling him that the boy was intelligent, cautious, and aware of the world in ways most people did not see. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the plains, the cowboy decided to introduce the boy to some simple tasks. He handed him a bucket and gestured toward the well. At first, the boy hesitated, unsure what to do. The cowboy knelt beside him and demonstrated, lowering the bucket into the cool water and pulling it up. The boy watched carefully, mimicking the movements with quiet concentration. He spilled water a few times, but the cowboy did not scold him. Instead, he smiled and said, "That's all right. You'll get it." Slowly, the boy began to understand, learning through action rather than words, discovering that mistakes were not punishable but were instead part of the learning process. As the days passed, small routines began to form. The cowboy would rise early, tending to the horses, checking fences, and preparing meals, while the boy observed, gradually joining in. Sometimes he would sweep the cabin floor, other times he would fetch water or gather firewood. Each task was a lesson, not only in work but in patience, responsibility, and trust. The cowboy taught by example, demonstrating how to care for animals, how to read the weather, and how to move through the world with awareness and respect. The boy learned quickly, surprising even the cowboy with his sharpness and determination. But it was not only work that shaped their bond. The cowboy understood the importance of play, of teaching the boy that life could have moments of joy even in difficult circumstances. One evening, he pulled out a small leather ball and tossed it gently toward the boy. At first, the boy did not move, uncertain of what to do. Then, with a flicker of curiosity, he reached for it, tossing it back. Laughter, soft, hesitant, and entirely new, escaped from the boy. It was a sound the cowboy would remember, a reminder that beneath the silence was a heart capable of joy, humor, and connection. They spent hours tossing the ball, inventing games, and sharing moments of quiet companionship. Words were not necessary. Their understanding grew through gestures, expressions, and shared experiences. Food became another bridge between them. The cowboy would prepare simple meals, cornbread, beans, and roasted meat, and offer them to the boy with gentle encouragement. Sometimes the boy ate slowly, unsure of what was expected, or paused to watch the cowboy eat first. Other times, he shared small offerings, placing a piece of bread or a roasted vegetable on the cowboy's plate in a silent gesture of friendship. These moments, seemingly small, were powerful. They communicated trust, respect, and care in ways that words could not. Slowly, the boy began to understand that he was not merely a possession, but a companion, someone whose presence was valued and appreciated. The cowboy also introduced the boy to the animals on the property. Horses, dogs, and chickens all became teachers and friends. The boy learned to feed them, groom them, and understand their behaviors. He discovered that animals did not judge by speech or heritage. They responded to patience, kindness, and attentiveness. Through this connection, the boy began to open up, using gestures, facial expressions, and body language to communicate. He learned that even without words, he could express himself and be understood. The cowboy encouraged this, smiling whenever the boy found new ways to share his thoughts and feelings. One morning, the cowboy decided it was time to take the boy on a short ride. He led him to a gentle horse, speaking softly as he demonstrated how to mount. The boy hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes, but the cowboy's calm presence reassured him. Slowly, with careful guidance, the boy climbed onto the horse. They rode across the open plains, feeling the wind on their faces and the rhythm of hooves beneath them. In that moment, the boy felt a freedom he had never known, a sense of possibility, of movement, and of the world opening up before him. He did not speak, but his eyes shone with wonder, and the cowboy knew he was beginning to trust, beginning to believe that life could hold more than fear and uncertainty. As the days turned into weeks, the boy's confidence grew. He learned to perform chores independently, to ride the horse without constant supervision, and to communicate through gestures and expressions. The cowboy continued to be patient, never forcing speech, never imposing demands. He understood that trust was not earned through words alone, but through consistent kindness, respect, and shared experience. The boy, in turn, began to respond, showing affection in small ways, leaning on the cowboy's shoulder, offering a helping hand, or simply meeting his gaze with quiet recognition. Their bond deepened not through speech, but through understanding, patience, and shared life. Yet despite these moments of growth, challenges remained. The boy's past was never far from his mind. Memories of fear, loss, and uncertainty lingered, making him cautious, hesitant, and sometimes withdrawn. The cowboy recognized this and never pushed too hard. He allowed the boy space to process, to grieve, and to heal. He knew that trust, once broken in the past, could not be restored overnight. Through quiet presence, gentle encouragement, and unwavering patience, he offered the boy a safe space, a place where silence was not a weakness but a part of his identity, respected and understood. By the end of the first month, a routine had been established. The boy rose with the sun, helped with chores, explored the land, and returned to the cabin for meals and rest. He had begun to smile, laugh, and even initiate small gestures of play and affection. The cowboy noticed every change, understanding that each small step was significant. He marveled at the boy's resilience, intelligence, and spirit. Though words were absent, communication had blossomed in their own unique way, proving that human connection did not always need speech. It thrived on respect, patience, and understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the cowboy sat with the boy near the fire. The flames crackled, sending sparks dancing into the cool night air. The boy poked at the embers with a stick, fascinated by the small explosions of light and heat. The cowboy watched him quietly, appreciating the progress they had made. In that moment, words were unnecessary. The boy's presence, the shared silence, and the gentle crackle of the fire spoke volumes about trust, patience, and the possibility of a future built on respect and understanding. The cowboy knew their journey had only begun, but he also knew that with time, compassion, and patience, the boy would grow strong, confident, and unafraid of the world that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving. The boy and the cowboy had settled into a quiet rhythm on the Outskirts of town. The cabin, once unfamiliar and intimidating, now felt a little more like home. Yet, despite the peace of the open plains and the safety of the cowboys' presence, the outside world was never far away. The town still whispered. The same people who had hesitated at the auction now watched the cabin from afar, curious and judgmental, questioning why the cowboy had taken in a boy who could not speak and whose heritage many misunderstood. The boy, sensitive to the stares of strangers, often froze when he noticed them. He had begun to trust the cowboy, but the judgment of others reminded him that the world could still be harsh. One morning, the cowboy decided it was time for the boy to visit town, not for shopping or business, but to see that the world could be approached carefully and with confidence. "We'll go slow," the cowboy said, his voice calm and reassuring. "No one can hurt you if we take it one step at a time." The boy nodded, gripping his small satchel tightly, his heart beating fast. The streets of town were busy that day, with merchants selling goods, children running past, and townsfolk exchanging gossip and news. Every glance felt like a test. Every whisper seemed to carry judgment. But the cowboy remained steady, a shield against the harshness, walking beside him and offering silent encouragement. As they moved through the square, some townspeople whispered openly, voicing disapproval. "Why would he bring that boy here?" one woman muttered, shaking her head. "He'll only bring trouble," another man snorted. "He can't even talk. Worthless, that one." The boy felt the weight of their words even though he did not speak. His small shoulders hunched and he looked down, afraid of drawing attention. But the cowboy gently guided him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ignore them," he said softly. "They don't see the truth." The boy glanced up at him, noticing the calm in his eyes. Slowly he began to lift his head, realizing that perhaps he did not have to fear every gaze, every word. He had an ally, someone who believed in him when the world had not. In the town square, they stopped near a well. The cowboy gestured for the boy to watch carefully. He wanted the boy to practice interaction without fear. The boy observed, learning how to navigate through the crowd, how to avoid stares, and how to respond with gestures rather than words. He learned that a nod, a smile, or simply walking confidently could communicate more than speech. These small lessons were crucial, teaching him that even in a world full of judgment, he could assert his presence and maintain dignity. The cowboy's patience never wavered, and the boy began to trust that he could face the town without fear, step by careful step. Not everyone in town was critical. Some older women and children noticed the boy's quiet attentiveness, his careful movements, and the way he observed without disturbing. They whispered softly to each other, expressing curiosity instead of disdain. "He seems gentle," one woman said. "Maybe he's just shy." The children watched him, intrigued by his silence and the mysterious air around him. They did not fear him, instead they were drawn to his quiet intelligence. The boy, noticing their interest, felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps not everyone would judge him harshly. Perhaps some people could see past appearances and appreciate who he truly was. However, challenges soon emerged. One afternoon, while the cowboy and the boy were walking through town to buy supplies, a group of men approached. Their faces were stern, their voices loud. "What's this?" one demanded, pointing at the boy. "Why are you keeping him? He's nothing but trouble." The cowboy stepped in front of the boy, placing himself between the men and the child. "He's not trouble," the cowboy said firmly. "He's under my protection, and I won't allow anyone to speak to him that way." The men laughed, dismissing the words as nonsense, but the cowboy's unwavering stance silenced them. The boy, hiding slightly behind the cowboy, felt a surge of trust. He realized that the cowboy would defend him, that he was no longer alone, and that someone truly saw his value beyond the whispers and judgments of others. The boy's confidence began to grow through these encounters. He learned to respond with small gestures, pointing, smiling, or shaking his head, communicating without fear. The cowboy encouraged him, praising every attempt at expression. "Good," he would say. "That's exactly how you show them who you are." Slowly, the boy discovered that communication did not require words. His actions, his attention, and his willingness to engage were enough to assert himself and earn respect. The cowboy's guidance made him feel capable, valued, and seen, even in a town that had once ignored him entirely. One day, a small fire broke out near the edge of town, and the boy instinctively ran toward it, wanting to help. The cowboy followed, keeping a close eye on him, ensuring he remained safe. The townsfolk were surprised to see the boy act with courage, carrying buckets of water and helping to douse the flames. His bravery could not be denied. Even those who had whispered harshly before now looked at him with respect, realizing that his silence did not mean weakness. The boy had shown them without a single word that he had strength, intelligence, and courage. The cowboy watched proudly, knowing that these small moments of recognition were shaping the boy's self-worth and altering the town's perception slowly but surely. As the weeks passed, the boy began to take on more responsibilities. He learned to care for the horses, mend fences, and help in the cabin. Each task was a chance to prove himself, both to the cowboy and, gradually, to the townspeople who had begun to notice his diligence. Some still judged silently, but many could no longer ignore his abilities. The boy's presence, once seen as a burden, became a quiet testament to resilience, determination, and the power of trust. The cowboy's patient guidance had transformed fear into courage, silence into communication, and judgment into admiration. Yet the boy still faced moments of doubt. At night, he would sometimes wake up, remembering the harsh stares and whispers from the auction. He would glance at the cowboy, seeking reassurance, and the cowboy would smile, offering a gentle touch or a nod. "You're safe," he would say. "You're stronger than you know." These words, though few, carried immense weight. They reminded the boy that he was no longer defined by fear or by the opinions of others. He had a place, a protector, and a mentor who believed in him, guiding him through the complexities of a world that had not been kind to him before. The boy also began to learn the value of patience and observation. He noticed the townspeople, their routines, their moods, and their reactions. He learned which streets were safe, which faces were friendly, and which moments required caution. This awareness gave him confidence. He was no longer just a silent observer. He was learning to navigate the world with intelligence and skill. The cowboy encouraged this, teaching him that understanding people was as important as any physical skill. The boy absorbed these lessons quietly, growing more self-reliant and self-assured each day. Through all of these experiences, the bond between the cowboy and the boy deepened. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, patience, and trust. The cowboy learned from the boy as much as the boy learned from him. He admired the boy's resilience, intelligence, and ability to communicate without words. He saw in the boy a strength and a wisdom that many adults lacked. In turn, the boy saw the cowboy not only as a protector, but also as a teacher, a guide, and a friend. Together, they faced the challenges of a town that had once doubted the boy's worth, proving that understanding, empathy, and courage could overcome prejudice. By the end of the season, the boy had transformed. He was no longer the frightened, silent child who had stood on the auction platform. He had gained confidence, skills, and a sense of belonging. The townspeople, though slow to change, had begun to recognize his value. Some still whispered, but others nodded respectfully, acknowledging his courage and intelligence. The boy had faced prejudice, learned to navigate it, and emerged stronger and more self-assured. And through it all, the cowboy had remained a steady presence, offering guidance, protection, and unwavering belief in the boy's potential. As autumn approached, the plains turned golden and the days grew shorter. The boy stood beside the cowboy, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of orange and red. He felt a sense of pride and accomplishment he had never known. The world outside their cabin was still full of challenges, but he had learned that courage, patience, and trust could overcome even the harshest judgments. And he knew that, with the cowboy by his side, he could face whatever came next. The boy and the cowboy had settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace, yet the world outside their cabin was not always forgiving. Despite the boy's growing confidence and skills, there were those in town who refused to accept him. Some looked at his silence and heritage as a weakness, while others whispered that the cowboy was foolish for trusting a child who could not speak. The whispers began to turn into challenges, and the boy realized that, while he had learned to navigate the world cautiously, the world itself still had much to teach him. One morning, as the cowboy prepared to head into town for supplies, a group of men blocked the path leading from their property. They were older, weathered, and spoke with a loud, commanding tone. "We've heard you've been keeping that boy," one of them said, his eyes narrowing. "You're wasting your time, he's nothing but trouble." The cowboy stepped in front of the boy, his posture firm, his eyes calm. "He's no trouble," the cowboy said steadily. "He's learning just like anyone else." The men laughed, a low, mocking sound that made the boy flinch. But the cowboy remained steadfast, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. The boy watched closely, feeling a mix of anxiety and admiration. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. As days passed, the townspeople's challenges became more subtle. Some questioned why the boy was allowed near the town's animals or why he helped with chores. Others tried to trick him, testing his patience and intelligence, expecting mistakes. But the boy had grown. Through the cowboy's guidance, he had learned observation, patience, and problem-solving. When a farmer brought a stubborn mule that refused to move, the boy calmly assessed the animal, noticing its hesitation and fear. Instead of forcing it, he approached gently, offering water and steady gestures. Slowly, the mule followed him, proving that understanding and care could achieve what force could not. The cowboy watched silently, pride swelling in his chest. The boy's actions spoke louder than any words, showing the town that value could not always be measured by speech alone. Yet, challenges were not always external. The boy himself struggled with doubts and frustration. There were moments when he wished he could speak, to explain himself to those who questioned him, to share his thoughts and feelings. The silence that had once protected him now sometimes felt like a barrier, keeping him from fully expressing who he was. The cowboy noticed these moments, observing the subtle tension in the boy's body and the flicker of sadness in his eyes. "It's okay," the cowboy said one evening as they sat beside the fire. "You don't have to speak to show who you are. Your actions, your heart, your courage, they tell more than words ever could." The boy listened, absorbing the words, understanding that he was not defined by what he could not do, but by what he could. One afternoon, the cowboy decided it was time for the boy to face a larger challenge. They rode into town together, carrying supplies and walking confidently through the main street. The townsfolk watched, some with curiosity, others with judgment. A group of men approached, testing both the cowboy and the boy. "You think he can handle this?" one asked, a smirk on his face. The cowboy simply nodded, allowing the boy to step forward. The boy held his head high, moving past them calmly and confidently. He helped deliver supplies, guided horses, and assisted with chores, all without a single word. The townspeople could not help but notice. His actions, precise and kind, were proof that strength, patience, and intelligence could exist without speech. Slowly, respect began to replace judgment. The cowboy and the boy also faced dangers outside the town. One day, while exploring the nearby hills, they encountered a rattlesnake, coiled and ready to strike. The boy froze for a moment, his heart racing, but the cowboy's steady presence reminded him to remain calm. Together, they assessed the situation, carefully guiding the snake away from their path without harming it. The boy learned that courage was not about rushing headlong into danger, but about understanding, patience, and careful action. This lesson, like so many others, was cemented through experience rather than words, showing the boy that the world could be faced thoughtfully and bravely. Despite these successes, the boy still struggled with moments of loneliness. The world outside the cabin was often unkind, and there were days when he longed for connection beyond the cowboy's guidance. He missed companions who might understand him more fully, who could see beyond the silence without judgment. The cowboy, perceptive and patient, noticed this and introduced him to the animals in new ways. They trained the horse together, worked with the dogs, and even cared for the chickens, finding joy in shared tasks and gentle teamwork. The boy began to see that companionship came in many forms, and that trust and loyalty could be found not only in people, but also in the bonds formed through care and respect. As the seasons changed, the challenges grew more complex. Winter approached, bringing harsher weather and longer nights. The boy had to learn new skills, gathering firewood, keeping the cabin warm, and helping tend to animals in freezing conditions. Each task tested his patience, courage, and resilience. The cowboy guided him carefully, demonstrating how to work efficiently and safely, but allowing the boy to take initiative. Slowly, the boy began to handle responsibilities independently, showing that growth came not from words alone, but from experience, guidance, and perseverance. Through all these trials, the boy discovered his own inner strength. He learned to read the expressions and intentions of others, to anticipate challenges before they arose, and to act with confidence even when fear lingered. The cowboy remained by his side, offering support, encouragement, and gentle correction when needed. Their partnership grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The boy was no longer merely a silent observer of the world. He had become an active participant, capable of facing challenges and overcoming prejudice with intelligence and courage. One evening, as a snowstorm approached, the boy helped secure the animals and prepare the cabin for the cold night ahead. He worked diligently, moving quickly and efficiently, his movements precise and confident. The cowboy watched, proud and silently amazed at how far the boy had come. "You've grown strong," he said simply. The boy nodded, a small smile on his face. Though he did not speak, the words resonated deeply. He had learned that strength was measured not by speech or outward approval, but by courage, skill, and the ability to persevere in the face of difficulty. Even as the boy thrived, the town continued to challenge their presence. Some townsfolk were still skeptical, while others actively tried to undermine the boy's progress. They would leave false rumors, test his patience, or attempt to provoke him into mistakes. But the boy, guided by the cowboy's steady mentorship, learned to ignore distractions, focus on his tasks, and respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Each challenge he overcame reinforced his confidence, proving not only to himself, but also to the world that he was capable, intelligent, and resilient. By the end of the harsh winter, the boy had transformed into someone who could face the world with courage and wisdom. He had earned respect through patience, kindness, and skill. The cowboy's guidance had shaped him, teaching lessons that words alone could not convey. Together, they had faced prejudice, danger, and skepticism, and had emerged stronger and more united. The boy's silence was no longer seen as weakness, but as a quiet strength, a testament to the power of patience, trust, and understanding. As spring approached, melting the snow and bringing new life to the plains, the boy and the cowboy stood together outside the cabin, surveying the land they had worked on and cared for through the harsh winter. The boy's eyes shone with quiet confidence. He had learned resilience, responsibility, and courage. The cowboy placed a hand on his shoulder, smiling. "You've come a long way," he said. The boy nodded, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment that words could never capture. He had faced the challenges of the town, the harshness of the seasons, and the judgment of others, and had grown stronger, wiser, and braver through it all. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that growth often comes not through ease, but through challenge. The boy had discovered that the world could be harsh and unfair, but with guidance, patience, and courage, it could also be understood, navigated, and even appreciated. And through every trial, the cowboy had been a constant presence, a mentor, protector, and friend. Together, they had faced the world, proving that strength, respect, and resilience could triumph over prejudice, fear, and doubt. Spring had fully arrived, and the plains surrounding the cowboy's cabin were alive with color and movement. Flowers bloomed along the edges of the trails, birds sang from the trees, and the sun shone warmly, casting a golden glow across the land. It was a time of renewal, and the boy could feel the change not only in the world around him but within himself. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident than he had ever been. The silence that had once seemed like a limitation had become a source of strength, a reminder of his resilience and the careful, thoughtful way he approached life. The cowboy and the boy stood outside the cabin one morning, surveying the land they had tended and cared for over the months. The boy ran his hands over the wooden fence, checking for loose boards, and his eyes sparkled with pride as he noticed the progress they had made together. The cowboy watched him quietly, admiration evident in his gaze. "You've done well," he said softly. "Look at what you've built, what you've learned. You're not the same boy who stood on that auction platform." The boy nodded, a small, satisfied smile spreading across his face. Though he did not speak, his eyes reflected understanding, gratitude, and a deep sense of accomplishment. The bond between them had grown into something unbreakable. The cowboy had not only taught the boy skills and knowledge, but had also provided something far more important: trust and acceptance. The boy knew, without doubt, that he was valued and respected. And in return, the cowboy had learned lessons as well, lessons about patience, empathy, and the strength that comes from seeing a person for who they truly are rather than what society might judge them to be. Together, they had created a partnership built on loyalty, mutual respect, and love. The town, which had once whispered cruelly about the boy and his presence, began to change its perspective. Those who had doubted his abilities started to notice his courage and intelligence. Children who once only observed him from a distance now sought his company, curious about the games he played, the skills he had learned, and the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from him. The boy, though still silent, had found a way to connect, to communicate, and to inspire through action, empathy, and integrity. Even the most skeptical townspeople could not ignore the way he cared for the animals, assisted the cowboy, and carried himself with dignity. One day, a festival was held in the town square, a rare occasion for celebration, music, and community gatherings. The cowboy decided it was time for the boy to join, to experience the warmth of communal life beyond work and daily routines. As they entered the square, the boy held his head high, observing the sights and sounds with keen attention. Children ran past with laughter, musicians played lively tunes, and townsfolk shared food and stories. Though the boy remained silent, he was no longer invisible. People noticed him, watched his careful movements, and admired his bravery and calm confidence. During the festival, the boy helped a small child who had dropped a basket of fruit, picking up the scattered apples and handing them back with a gentle smile. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. The townspeople began to see him differently, not as a mute Apache boy or someone to be pitied, but as a young person with kindness, intelligence, and courage. The cowboy watched quietly, proud that the boy's actions were earning him respect naturally, through deeds rather than words. The boy also began to participate in small tasks during the festival, assisting with decorations, organizing supplies, and helping wherever needed. His diligence and quiet efficiency impressed many, including those who had once doubted him. A few townspeople even approached the cowboy privately, acknowledging that they had misjudged the boy. "I didn't think he could do it," one man admitted. "But I see now, he's capable and he's strong." The cowboy nodded, letting the words settle without comment. He knew the boy's growth was not about proving anyone wrong but about discovering his own strength and value. Despite the recognition, the boy remained humble. He did not boast or seek attention. Instead, he focused on the tasks at hand and the people around him. He had learned that true respect and trust are earned through actions, patience, and kindness, not by seeking approval. The cowboy encouraged this, praising the boy quietly when appropriate and allowing him to find pride in his own accomplishments. The boy had come to understand that his worth was not determined by the opinions of others, but by the integrity, courage, and effort he brought to every challenge. As the festival drew to a close, the boy and the cowboy walked back to their cabin under the soft glow of the setting sun. The sky was painted with shades of pink, orange, and purple, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and earth. The boy's steps were steady, confident, and free of the fear that had once weighed heavily on him. He had faced judgment, danger, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully aware of his own capabilities. The cowboy glanced at him, a quiet smile on his face. "You've grown so much," he said. "I couldn't be prouder." The boy nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection and gratitude that words could never express. The seasons continued to change, and with them, the boy's skills and confidence expanded. He learned to care for the land through planting, harvesting, and tending to the animals. He became proficient in riding, guiding horses, and even basic survival skills. Each day brought new opportunities to learn, grow, and demonstrate courage and kindness. The cowboy remained a patient guide, offering instruction, encouragement, and protection, but always allowing the boy to take initiative. This balance of guidance and independence was crucial in shaping the boy's sense of self and his ability to navigate the world with confidence. Over time, the town's perception of the boy shifted completely. Where once there had been whispers of doubt and judgment, there was now acknowledgement, admiration, and respect. People sought his help with tasks, valued his quiet insight, and even shared moments of camaraderie and friendship. The boy had transformed from a silent, cautious observer into a confident, respected member of the community. He had proven that strength, courage, and intelligence were not defined by speech, but by action, patience, and integrity. The boy's journey was not only about gaining respect from others, but also about discovering his own voice in the world. Though he remained mute, he had learned to communicate powerfully through gestures, expressions, and actions. He had learned to express kindness, courage, and intelligence without words, proving that communication is far more than just speech. The cowboy, ever attentive, encouraged this form of expression, teaching the boy to trust his instincts, be observant, and understand that silence could be a strength when paired with wisdom and compassion. One afternoon, as they sat together on a hill overlooking the plains, the boy pointed to the horizon, then gestured toward himself and the cowboy. The cowboy nodded, understanding immediately. The boy was acknowledging their journey together, the growth, trust, and partnership they had built over time. Though no words were spoken, the meaning was clear. They were no longer merely teacher and student, guardian and charge. They were companions, equals, and friends united by shared experience, trust, and loyalty. The cowboy smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We've come a long way," he said softly. The boy looked out over the plains, feeling a sense of pride, accomplishment, and belonging. He had faced prejudice, fear, and uncertainty, and had grown stronger with every challenge. He had learned that courage is not the absence of fear but the willingness to face it. He had learned that respect is earned through action, patience, and integrity. And he had learned that trust, once given and nurtured, could create bonds stronger than any hardship. By the time summer returned, the boy had become a symbol of quiet strength and resilience. Children and adults alike looked up to him, inspired by the patience, courage, and intelligence he demonstrated in every task, every interaction, and every act of kindness. The cowboy had always known the boy's potential, but even he was amazed at how far the boy had come, transforming not only himself, but also the perceptions of those around him. Finally, one evening as the sun set, painting the sky with brilliant hues, the boy and the cowboy stood together on the porch of their cabin. The plains stretched out before them, alive with the colors and sounds of summer. The boy turned to the cowboy, placing a hand on his arm in a gesture of deep appreciation. The cowboy returned the gesture, understanding the sentiment fully. Words were unnecessary. Everything they had experienced, endured, and achieved together had led to this moment of quiet triumph. The boy's journey from the auction platform to this day had been one of growth, courage, and resilience. He had faced the harsh judgment of others, the challenges of survival, and the uncertainties of a world that often misunderstood him. But through patience, guidance, and unwavering trust, he had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a strong, respected, and confident young man. The cowboy had been his protector, his mentor, and his friend, teaching him not only skills and knowledge, but also the deeper lessons of trust, integrity, and humanity. As night fell over the plains, the boy looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of peace and belonging he had never known before. He had found a home, a guide, and a friend. He had found courage, respect, and purpose. And though his voice remained silent, his actions, his heart, and his spirit spoke louder than words ever could. The journey was complete, yet the future stretched out before them, full of possibility, adventure, and the promise of continued growth. Together, the cowboy and the boy faced the world, not as teacher and student, but as companions, equals, and friends, ready for whatever lay ahead.